Hi, Acadiana. I'm Meteorologist Dave Baker. Happy Monday to you. Hopefully you had a great weekend. This is Let's Talk Tropics here on Acadiana Weather today. Not a whole lot going on out there, and really for the first time in quite a long time here on Acadiana Weather today's Let's Talk Tropics, we do not have a named storm. And the last time we had that, I think, was when we got Helene named back on September the 24th. Now, we didn't have any named items over the course of the weekend, but on Friday we were still watching Leslie out there rather. And today we've got Disturbance 94L and maybe something else that wants to try to fire up over the southwestern Caribbean Sea. So we still have quite a bit to talk about here on Let's Talk Tropics, even though things are relatively quiet at the moment. Another gorgeous day across Acadiana, a lot of sunshine, a couple of clouds are starting to mix in. Those dew points, though, are up a bit from where we were over the course of the weekend, so those heat index values are pushing into the upper 80s. It's sunny and 85 with the wind out of the west-northwest at 7, and our humidity is running at 57%. But probably most of you have heard the gumbo pot's already starting to ring as things are going to be changing here tomorrow night and going into the second half of the week. Some pretty skies out there, although it is a little more hazy than it has been over the past couple of days. And I don't know if it's just a lack of water there, or if you look at that top left-hand traffic cam, the I-10 at the I-49, could that possibly be some fall colors there mixing in? Because you know the fall colors here are just brilliant every single year here in South Louisiana. But we do have some very pretty skies out there. It's pretty dry though, and unfortunately I know a lot of folks have been saying, boy, we really need rain, we need rain, we need the rain. Don't think we're going to be seeing any rain for quite some time, and it's probably not going to be this week. So most likely things are going to stay very, very dry. We're also 5 days out from when Hurricane Milton made landfall, and I was kind of making these comments late last week on the restoration of power. For a while, about 3.5 million folks were without power there over central and southern portions of Florida. We're now down to under 500,000, so only about 10% of all of the folks that lost power still are without power right now. So they are making some incredible progress considering a Category 3 hurricane made landfall just 5 days ago. Very quiet across most of the country. We've got a trough that's now starting to dig a little bit farther up here across the upper Great Lakes, and that's going to be helping to send this cold front that's currently over central Louisiana, eventually pushing it out into the Gulf of Mexico. And that's when we're going to start to see more of the cooler and drier conditions coming in as we head into the middle part of the week. And that big ridge of high pressure will also be responsible for keeping any kind of tropical weather away from the east coast of the U.S. and most likely out of the Gulf of Mexico too. And for those of you who may want to get out there and enjoy some boating out on the Gulf, really pretty day out there. Winds out of the west at about 5 to 10 knots, seas running about 1 to 2 feet. But if you're going to be doing some boating or working out there over the next day or so, it's going to be pretty nice. But once that cold front gets through, you know how it goes. If you're familiar with the Gulf waters, you get those choppy conditions, and a lot of times you get a small craft advisory that gets posted once you get a big cold front to come through. But look at the Gulf of Mexico, nice and clear. Again, we've got a little bit of cloud cover over Acadiana right now, but that's not going to cause any problems. That's part of that frontal boundary that's kind of stalling out right now, but it's going to get another push tomorrow, and eventually the rest of us here in Acadiana will start to feel more of those cooler and drier conditions. We'll also watch out for the possibility as that front settles over the Gulf of Mexico for any tropical development. Right now that doesn't look very likely, but as you get into the month of October, frontal boundaries, kind of like what we see in June, can sometimes develop tropical systems. Now you will see a flare up there of some moisture and some thunderstorm activity here in the western part of the Caribbean. That is one area that we will talk about here in just a little while. It is not really on the National Hurricane Center's radar at this point, but a lot of the models have been indicating maybe something developing down there. At this point, it looks like whatever does develop there will most likely stay off to our south. But on the tropical Atlantic satellite, remember we had Leslie finishing the week last week. That is gone. right there. It's finished, and it's going to continue to get moved off toward the northeast. And we were watching Disturbance 94L as we left you on Friday as well, thinking that there was going to be a little chance for some development right as it was passing south of the Cape Verde Islands, but then after it moved away, it was going to be less likely we would see any development. Well, that has been the case. It really didn't do anything over the course of the weekend, but we've got this huge ridge of high pressure that's currently over the Atlantic Ocean. So anything that's tropical there is going to kind of take the usual route across, the more tropical-like route across the Atlantic Ocean, and could be affecting these areas here over the northern part of the Caribbean a few days from now. As that ridge stays in place, it's basically going to shove everything off toward the west. But that's a little unusual as we get into October, because a lot of times those tropical type of waves will start to turn more toward the north and not really make that track all the way across the Atlantic Ocean. So that one, 94L, is on the radar of the National Hurricane Center's, at least their 7-day graphical weather outlook. Not expecting any development here in the near term, but maybe days 2 or 3 or 4, we could see some possibilities of development there. So nothing's going to happen today, probably not tomorrow either, but there is a potential we could see something later on. Pretty good swirl there at the low levels, and you can see that there's a little flare up of some thunderstorm activity that's starting to take place as well. But you could certainly see that low level circulation right there, drifting basically due west, and then you get that flare up of thunderstorms around the center. So maybe it's trying to do something. It doesn't look like the wind shear is too strong in that particular area. It looks like more of your wind shear is out here, and then maybe in the following path of it. But at this point in time, 94L is just kind of spinning there as a little low pressure area, and the pressure's down to 1011. So it's getting down into tropical territory, but it's not quite there yet. But the hurricane models are on this, as they were on Friday, and a general movement off toward the west, and then possibly making its way into the northern part of the Caribbean or the western Atlantic there, north of the Greater Antilles. So folks that are there in the Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, Haiti, and also Cuba and the Bahamas are going to be a little more interested in this particular system. Now, the intensity models have changed a bit over the course of the weekend. And as I said, it doesn't look like we're going to see a whole lot of action happening here in the next 1 or 2 days. But after you get past day 2 and you get into day 3, 4, and 5, you can see that the models kind of diverge a little bit more. And you've got some that are in the tropical storm mode, and even a couple of them by day 5 getting up into Category 1, even low-end Category 2 hurricanes. So there is a possibility for some development there, and some of the hurricane models are showing that. So since we have a designated disturbance out there, the HWRF runs on this. So we are getting some tropical type of hurricane models that are showing this. And as it basically moves off toward the west on the HWRF, you don't see a lot of action day 1 or day 2, but then as it gets a little bit closer to the northern Leeward Islands, you're starting to see some deepening of the low. And in fact, by the time it starts to move north of Puerto Rico, this particular model has it as a hurricane, possibly a Category 2 hurricane, maybe even getting close to Category 3, but a very tightly wound hurricane, kind of like what we saw with Milton on the early days there when it was in the southern part of the Gulf of Mexico. And sometimes those smaller, tightly wound tropical systems tend to deepen quite quickly, and of course the waters there are very warm. Now the HAFS model is the other hurricane model that's on it, and I doesn't seem too excited about it here in the next 2 or 3 days, but maybe starting to get a little more development as it moves north of the Virgin Islands and getting toward Puerto Rico. But the intensity on this one is a lot lower than what the HWRF is, and it's showing kind of a modest tropical storm moving off toward the west. And if indeed this gets a name, this one will be called Nadine, which is the next name on the list. And if we get that next name on there, that will be the 14th named tropical system for the 2024 season. And the normal amount of named systems we have during a hurricane season is 14. So if we get Nadine, then we will now have achieved a normal season with still 6 weeks to go, where we could still end up being above normal on our named storm. So that is something that we'll be watching, and the main reason is because it seems to be taking more of a traditional route across the Atlantic Ocean and could be affecting some of the islands there and even the U.S. territories of the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico there in the northern part of the Caribbean. So that is something we'll be watching. And I've got links to the disturbance page from Tropical Tidbits down in the description below. So now let's get into this other area that's really more model generated, and this could have something to do with the Central American gyre, maybe a little bit of a tropical wave kind of working its way off toward the west. But one of the things that you will notice here in the southwestern Caribbean is you are seeing pretty big flare up of thunderstorms. They're not anything organized there, but it is a lot of thunderstorm activity and moisture, and that's kind of how our tropical systems just kind of get going. At this point, it looks like it's going to stall in this area here for maybe a day or two, and then may slide off toward the west. Now, again, the GFS has still been calling for a low pressure area, and actually this is calling for a formidable tropical system to move along the northern Honduran coast. And then, of course, there in those latter frames, you'll see what might be Nadine or 94L coming out of the Atlantic Ocean. So we're kind of looking at two different things on these global models going out 10 days. But the GFS, fortunately, looks like it's going to be shoving what might develop over the southwestern Caribbean off toward the west over Central America. That's going to bring some heavy rains, but it wouldn't take it into the Gulf of Mexico. And you see this giant ridge of high pressure that's currently over the southeastern part of the country. And that's part of that trough that's going to be getting us cooler as we go into the rest of the week. So anything that's down there would continue to shove off toward the west. And then that high is going to kind of push off a little bit off toward the southeast. So that might give whatever's coming out of here a chance to make more of a northward turn. But the GFS model kind of has it stall there over western Cuba and then gets picked up by a trough, and it quickly starts to move off toward the northeast. And you might even notice that there's another ripple of low pressure that tries to develop along the cold front that's going to be pushing through off the east coast may actually generate a low pressure area there, and then that would whip off out toward the Atlantic Ocean. So there's a couple of different places where we could see some tropical development. Nothing looks certain right now, but there are some little echoes on the computer models that are showing maybe we'll get some development. So let's move on to the Euro model, and the Euro is not as robust as the GFS at developing anything here over the western part of the Caribbean, but you will see the gathering of moisture, and some heavy rains would be moving across Central America. Then, of course, over here you start to see 94L coming into the picture, and it does virtually the same thing as the GFS does. It kind of works its way off toward the west, over toward maybe the eastern part of the Bahamas, and then once it kind of gets in there, it gets picked up like this big trough that's coming off the east coast. That would, again, stall it there, and that's going into next weekend, and then shoving it back off toward the northeast going into the following week. That would be the week of October, I think, 18, 19, 21st there, moving off into the Atlantic Ocean. So again, big ridge of high pressure here should be able to block anything from coming in by both the GFS as well as the Euro. So let's look at the Canadian model for fun. And this one, again, showing kind of a weaker low pressure area developing over the western Caribbean. Perhaps 94L a little bit stronger, making its way over toward the northern part of the Greater Antilles. But again, big ridge of high pressure here, trough coming off the east coast. It hits that roadblock, and then it starts to shove its way back off toward the northeast. So that would be a pretty good scenario for us here in the U.S., keeping any tropical systems away. And then finally, the Icon, which only goes out 7 days, still has that big ridge of high pressure here over the southeastern U.S., does have a little weak low trying to develop over the western Caribbean, but also that high should shove it off toward the west, and it shouldn't bring us any problems, although you do see a little more of a moisture gather there over the far western part of the Gulf of Mexico coming up about day 6 or 7. But there's 94L out here, and watch as it kind of drifts off toward the west, and then if it gets caught up in that trough, it should start to move off toward the northeast. But the icon going out 7 days rather, kind of stalls it out here over western Cuba. So is that going to maybe make a continued track westward toward the Yucatan, or is it going to get caught up in a trough here? Not real clear on what's going to happen there because it only goes out 7 days. But I can say that a big ridge of high pressure over the southeastern United States is probably going to block any tropical activity from coming in our direction. Now, it is starting to get late in the hurricane season, and the water temperatures are still quite warm. So these are Celsius temperatures. Anything over 26.5 is the equivalent of 80 degrees on the Fahrenheit scale, and you need 80-degree water to sustain or help a tropical system be able to form. So everything that's in yellow or brighter going toward the red scheme is going to be temperatures above 80 degrees. So you can still see that virtually the entire Atlantic Basin, including where 94L is trying to develop and could possibly move off toward the west, the water temperatures are warm enough as it is, but it will be moving into even warmer water temperatures there that are about 86, 87 degrees as you get over here around the northern Greater Antilles there into the western part of the Atlantic. Shear is also relatively light where 94L is, and also where a low might develop over the southwestern part of the Caribbean Sea. So there's your 94L right there, and you can see most of the area that's in its path is in a relatively low wind shear environment, and then this extreme southwestern part of the Caribbean Sea also has some low wind shear as well. But look at all the wind shear that's on up here right along the Gulf Coast. That's going to pretty much block anything from coming in our direction. So not too worried about the U.S. at this point. And really all of this kind of follows along what we would normally see during the middle part of October, as most of our tropical systems track over the western Caribbean, southeastern Gulf, and the western part of the Atlantic. Now this isn't showing where storms would normally form. This is where that they have tracked since 1944. And the highest amounts, of course, are going to be there between the Central American coast, Florida, the Bahamas, western Cuba. And then most of the time they turn out to sea and move back out into the Atlantic Ocean. So a lot of times what you see is you get stuff that kind of moves in that particular direction. And that's why those are the higher areas where you would see tropical movement. And as far as the frequency, it is still mid-October, and a lot of people think that we're pretty much shutting down by this point in time, but we're in middle October right there. But you can see that's about the same place we are in the mid part of August. And I know August wasn't a real exciting month this year. But normally August is relatively busy. September gets really busy, and then October is kind of busy. But November, it really does drop off. And I did see some discussion on Facebook about December tropical systems. We've had a named system every single month of the year. Even though hurricane season is June through the end of November, we've had systems go into December. May hurricanes have happened before, and I'm pretty sure it's only February and April where we haven't had a hurricane develop. We've had hurricanes in the other months, including January, and that's happened back in a couple of times. I think the last time happened back in 2005. So if you do hear about tropical storms or named storms outside of the hurricane season, it's not very common to have anything happen in December or January or even going into February. But May and the early part of December, it's a little more likely. So it's not quite that unusual. Maybe about every other year, maybe every third year, it does happen. So the Global Tropical Hazards Outlook, just before I let you go, is going to be updated tomorrow. Unfortunately, I don't get it until after Let's Talk Tropics is over. So we will be looking at this on Wednesday. But going into next week, that Western Caribbean is still the possibility where we could see some development. And the one that was issued last week is also keeping the western part of the Caribbean a little bit on the hot side there going into the final week of October. That could be from the Central American Gyre. Remember, this is a little different than this graphic here, which measures all of the tracks. This is measuring where things could possibly form. So it looks like at least according to this, maybe the Atlantic will be shutting down after the 16th. So if we get 94L to develop, it may make its way off toward the west, but hopefully we're going to start to see things starting to shut down here in the middle part of the Atlantic Ocean, and we'll just concentrate on the far western parts of the Caribbean and possibly the Gulf of Mexico, getting into the latter part of hurricane season where most of our action happens in the first place. Well, I hope you enjoy Let's Talk Tropics. I sure enjoy our midday visits. Like this video, subscribe to my channel, tell your friends too. We'll continue to be doing this through the hurricane season, and make sure you turn on those notifications. And don't forget, I do a daily morning weather forecast, just a real quick short visit on the upcoming weather conditions and how they're going to affect your day every day at 7:30 right here on Acadiana Weather Today's YouTube channel. So go back and look at some of those videos and enjoy yourself on my channel. I'm Meteorologist Dave Baker. Hope you have a great rest of your Monday, and I'll see you tomorrow morning for Acadiana Weather Today.